As sentient beings, we find ourselves thrown into a world that inflicts immense pain and suffering. So having the option of a graceful exit should be seen as a basic, universal human right. Since our existence is better to never have been, we should all have the right to die. Welcome to the Right to No Longer Exist, a Right to Die podcast, featuring your hosts, Danny, Kevin, and Amanda. In this show, we attempt to change the perception of society's views of voluntary euthanasia and what true autonomy could look like.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Right to No Longer Exist, the Right to Die podcast. I am here joined with Amanda and Danny, and we are on episode 4. Today, we're going to talk about a very, very important subject regarding mentally ill and the issues with that, and basically a big taboo that's been created about not allowing them to have any choice whatsoever about how they want to live their life, much less exit life. So how are you guys doing?
We're doing fantastic. We're ready to go.
Yep, not too bad, all things considered. Happy to be here.
Great. What we have found is a blog that we'd like to read, which is just very powerful, very strong, interesting article that hits home and basically nails a lot of the points that regarding this issue. And the first person I think that was going to start reading this one was, I forgot. So who was it? I forget. Oh yeah, it was Danny. Danny was going to start us off. We're going to take turns reading this piece. We might stop and have some fun in between talking about it. But yeah, we're going to take some turns reading it, and hopefully you guys, hopefully this is powerful, because it really is important. The name of the article is "The Lack of Clarity of Thought Argument." And it's basically going through all the different reasons for the arguments for people claiming that mentally disabled people just clearly don't have a lack of the clarity of thought, have a lack of ability to determine their own suffering. And we combat that. So I think Danny's our first one to read. So if you feel free, go for it.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, this is a brilliant piece of work, and it definitely needs to be noticed. And we will send the link below, after all this is edited. But anyway, okay, this is the first paragraph. The basis of all opposition to euthanasia for the mentally ill in the field of medicine is the misguided assumption that the mentally ill who wish to be euthanized are always lacking in clarity of thought needed to be able to make informed, rational decisions when they express wishes to be euthanized to end the recurrent intolerable pain that they endure because of their mental illnesses. The words clinicians and world governments which forbid euthanasia to the mentally ill argue that it is never appropriate to euthanize the mentally ill because the state of emotional distress and the state of emotional distress they may be in when experiencing death wishes makes them mentally incompetent to make rational, informed decisions about their life. However, those of us who favor euthanasia for the mentally ill are not swayed by this argument. After all, we take into account the level of suffering to those who wish to be euthanized rather than their mere thinking ability. Therefore, this leads us to the following question. Are the death wishes that an individual expresses from emotional suffering a justifiable reason to force that individual into compulsory treatment and intervention? To those Those who oppose euthanasia for the mentally ill would likely answer this question with a resounding yes. After all, they believe that the individual in this situation is mentally handicapped and in their decision-making process, and they would claim that their condition is treatable, pointing at all the treatment methods that have been developed to date to treat mental health issues. Those of us who favor euthanasia for the mentally ill, however, have other considerations. For example, we take into account that there are many individuals who have a treatment-resistant mental illness, while also acknowledging that no treatment method available for mental illnesses is 100% effective for 100% of consumers. This leaves us with a significant population of individuals with mental illnesses who do not benefit from these treatment methods, who therefore experience death wishes because they suffer from chronic and intolerable pain due to their unbearable struggle with mental illness, thus diminishing the validity of the argument against euthanasia that such conditions are treatable. This raises another important question. Can the experience of chronic and intolerable suffering of a mentally ill individual be a justification to favor euthanasia to end this suffering? Those who oppose euthanasia for the mentally ill would likely answer this question with a resounding no. After all, they ultimately favor and prioritize life preservation over pain extinction, and therefore favor life imposition over freedom of choice. I love that. Between life and death. Those of us who favor euthanasia for the mentally ill, however, find this agenda to be deeply troubling. At its core, it is life-centered rather than patient-centered. This mentality in turn neglects important aspects of the suffering that those with refractory mental illnesses experience, and raise important concerns about current medical practices worldwide which deny euthanasia to the mentally ill, and the validity and ethics of the lack of clarity of thought argument as the standard pretext to encourage these practices. What a mouthful. Okay.
Yeah, it's amazing article or section. Like, it points out so much about. I just love how it's taught. It's going against the claims that so many people say that you'll get better. Try different treatments. Have you not tried any treatments? You're gonna get better. What if you got better? And like, some people can get better, and that's great, but a whole heck of a lot of people don't. And people try all kinds of options and treatments and this and that, and they end up struggling just the same as they did from day one. And so to be treated in such an insulting way, yeah, is sad, because that they don't have the ability to think correctly about what's going on. And you could argue, yeah, different scenarios regarding some hallucinatory type illnesses, but at the same time, pain is pain. Yeah. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I love what he has written so far, and you make a great point. You know, the mentally ill, those who suffer mentally and those who suffer physically are segregated. If you are, let's say, dying or suffering physically, that might change your perspective from wanting to live to wanting to die. But you're not considered unsound of mind if you want to die because you are suffering physically. But if you are suffering mentally, you're automatically out of the game. You're automatically considered unsound of mind. The point is, suffering is suffering. Whether it comes from the brain or the skin, it should be treated equally.
Yeah, I think it's a really important distinction that they pointed out between, being life-centered and patient-centered, where it's like after a while, these people are basically more, they're not at all within the person that's suffering's court at all. They're more in favor of the suffering going on than the solution to the suffering, unless the solution to the suffering happens to be their solution that they have this expectation should never run out. Like it's just absolutely cruel to expect people to continually subject themselves to in what sometimes results to being decades of therapies and different medications and side effects. And there's so many people that that's the expectation forever. And the fact that we have so little ability to negotiate for ourselves, especially after we've run the mile, we've done all this, we've done all these treatments over and over and over again. It's at some point I'm just saying it's devastating how little the focus really is on the person involved. And I don't think enough people point that out enough.
It's this hear no evil, see no evil thing. Just sweep it under the rug, just drug them up, stick them in a corner of a room somewhere, and it doesn't exist. People really don't like to see the real face of suffering, and someone with mental illness kind of really does display like the real dark side of life. And because they display it in a way or say it in a way or however whatever their condition is, that's disturbing. It is anybody, even if it's just really depressed. People have empathy and stuff, but when people are struggling in other ways that are unique or whatever, it's like people are really awful at treating those people as lesser humans than equals, which they should.
Yeah, the fact that therapy has increased and the suicide rate has gone up 33% in America from 1999 to 2019 is evidence that therapy is not that effective towards when it comes to people who want to die, who want out. But it can be effective for those who want therapy. The thing is, should therapy be imposed upon the individual? And I don't think it should. I think therapy should be a choice as well as euthanasia. And,
well, it absolutely shouldn't be imposed indefinitely. And that's the really cruel bit to me, is that there's never a bottom to that well that they expect you to jump in. One thing doesn't work, well, it's kind of your fault, and you have to jump to the next thing, and you have to jump to the next thing after that. And it can never be this. It can never be a way out. Because and at the end of the day, often it's because the way out affects them too harshly than supposedly it would affect you. Like it's too devastating to their concept of life and getting better. Like if you rip that mask off of what the medical industry can do to treat whatever may befall a person, if you show people that truth, and that perhaps the only way out really is the way out of the disorder or whatever that person has to be dealing with, well, that's at a cost to them. Then it starts being about what the mentally ill person is taking away from the well. And that's one of the really the most sick parts of this, I think, is that it becomes about like my desire to have access to euthanasia ends up somehow hurting those that don't want that possibility to ever exist, because it hurts the delusion of theirs about what life is and what living is. and what sustaining that for decades and decades and decades while suffering means. And that's just not fair.
Yeah, thanks. Great point. I mean, it's insulting too to them and exhausting to the patient when they're just, even they'll grasping for straws when they're asking like, okay, well, we haven't tried, this med didn't work, that med didn't work, or whatever. Have you tried talk therapy? And it's like, what? Just to talk to someone, you really think that's going to heal the permanent chemical imbalances that are going on in my brain, or whatever the situations are? I mean, clearly some of these situations are just permanent issues.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Everything has a physical causality. It's like emotional suffering has a physical causality, and the brain cannot tell the difference between emotional, psychological, and physical suffering, even though it feels differently to us. It's pretty much, the brain is in a state of being alarmed. And I just, the psychiatric community is basically a revolving door. It's like you go in, you're still not fixed. Well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Have you tried this? And they give these slew of things that you can try, which you probably know won't work or won't mitigate anything. And it's like, I don't know. It just seems like the grind just seems terrifying. Spending decades of trying things that will never work. And I guess that's all I have to say.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it's insane the nightmare that we have, the human history of human behavior has gone through and had to endure by people that assume all kinds of things about the mentally ill or whatever. Just they take advantage of that and exploit that as a power grab and abuse them, like just people with seizures, right? Like we know now it's just epilepsy, you take some meds, and even if you have seizures, we know what's going on. There's nothing, the devil, it hasn't taken control of you. This is like stuff people used to believe, and they would like take just someone with simple epilepsy and just, you're now like thrown in the basement, treated like, someone else that's severely bad. And now they're being traumatized by other people's mental conditions. And it's just this big war, and it's just a sludge war of just issues. No one's getting better. Everyone's just being like continuously traumatized even more, because in history, they would just like keep them all in just one big room, and like, just, don't jump out the window is all they really would kind of, it's just insulting and sad. And I mean, gosh, I just can't get over the history of the effects of mental illness and how we've failed so hard at treating them.
It happens now, even in some parts of the world. I mean, if a kid is born deaf, it's not necessarily diagnosed the right way. There are orphanages where that's, that in parts of the world, like they end up making the people mentally ill because such an incredible lack of care is applied to perfectly treatable, livable issues. It's terrible. Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, it's like, what problems will the mentally ill have if they cease to exist, if they have a graceful exit? All of their problems will be solved. And I don't see that as an irrational thing at all. Some people would rather have that than to go through years of therapy, counseling, and all this stuff. So I think, yeah, it should be a personal choice.
Absolutely. I mean, and they get to the point where they just tie them down in a bed with chains, like they're being treated like a criminal that has committed a crime, but they haven't committed any crime. They're an innocent of being a victim to the crime of their own mental state. but out in the outside world and society, we've always treated them like as if they've committed a crime. You know, you act up and we're going to chain you to the bed and, you know, stick morphine in you to shut you up. And like, geez, you didn't even think about the consideration about like how decades of that can traumatize a person. Yeah, it's ugly. But if you guys have anything else to say, we can continue, but I like our rants.
Yeah, I mean, it's
right now, I think. Oh, sorry.
yeah. Oh, no, you're fine. It's traumatizing, just, you know, based on the fact that we don't have the freedom to leave. It's like, you know, we always have to be. You know, the mentally ill are basically put on trial and deemed insane. I'm probably saying the same thing. You can edit this out, but
That's fine. That's great. Amanda, were you chiming in? Want to say something?
Oh,
there?
no, I just wanted to say that I pretty much said my piece, and
okay,
I'm ready to move on.
Okay.
Only if you guys are, though.
Sure. Yeah. I think the next part is me. I'm the lucky one that gets to read the next section. Apologize in advance. This part's called lack of clarity of thought, scientifically sound argument, or gaslighting strategy. In order to evaluate the validity of the lack of clarity of thought argument against euthanasia for the mentally ill, we decided to use evidence against it straight from the horse's mouth to see how that argument would hold out. To do this, we will use the testimony of an individual with refractory mental illness who wishes to be euthanized. They will use the name Mary, tell the story, and explain why they want to be euthanized. Quote, "My mental illness has made it extremely difficult for me to have a tolerable life and for me to be able to advance through it smoothly. I struggle with developmental disorders that make me inept in social situations and make it hard for me to make friends or even land a committed relationship with somebody. People think I'm stupid or that I'm creepy and petty, so they push me away without even thinking about it. I get rejected like this on a regular basis, and every instance of this rejection feels bad, especially when I see other people getting together as friends, or when I see two people holding hands, staring passionately at each other, or making out. My developmental disorders also make it hard for me to do well in high demand classes or jobs, which means that I'm prone to be stuck in low end jobs, as I have been for a decade after I was supposed to graduate from college. I'm 33 years old right now, and I'm still dependent on my aging parents for financial support. I also struggle with a personality disorder, which makes me makes me feel overtly attached to people who I think show an ounce of interest in me, or for them to lose that interest when I cling to them. People push me away in those instances, and I cannot begin to tell you how much pain I feel when that happens. It's a stabbing pain I would not wish on my worst enemy. This personality disorder makes it a painful struggle for me to tolerate being rejected, as it makes it a painful struggle for me to tolerate being alone, thus making me very prone to becoming very emotionally dependent on the approval, acknowledgement, and support from people of interest, none of whom are interested in me to begin with. I've taken it upon myself to get help for these issues, but by having gone to talk therapy and by having taken prescription medications for well over a decade, and these issues I'm facing from my mental health issues persist. There are neither pills nor is there a cure for personality disorder like BPD or CPTSD. There is DBT, but the problem with it, first of all, is that it's expensive and I simply can't afford a single session with what little I earn. Psychologytoday.com is full of practitioners who don't take insurance and whose session fees are exorbitant, and no facility in my city that offers DBT takes Medicare or any other insurance. And even if I could afford DBT, it would take very hard work and months, if not years, to yield results. I'm having the exact same problem with my treatment of the developmental trauma. All of this makes matters all the worse, considering that my pain coping threshold has been far surpassed for years. Also, no skills that I've learned in therapy have helped me to make the issues I get from my developmental and personality disorders be at least tolerable. Like this was not enough, I also struggle with bipolar disorder, which makes me feel like my skull is cracking open when I'm off my lutada for too long, or like I'm in a suffocating daze when it's kicking in, or like I have no energy to do anything at all and my body is petrified by an overwhelming depression into an ocean of despair, even when I'm on the pill while gaining enormous amounts of weight. And this begs the question, why can't medication developers make medications so that they don't cause all these problems? Why do they have to make shitty medications that supposedly treat mental illness but cause a bunch of other problems to your body? It hits me to realize how far back my brain has held me in life, despite my efforts to move forward. Most of the serious problems I'm faced with right now come from some dysfunction and distressful signal from my brain that causes me some kind of suffering that has the potential to ripple into more suffering if I don't have the edge or know how to cope with these mental issues in ways that don't cause more problems in my life. Like I said before, I've gone to therapy and have had medications for over a decade to resolve these issues, but those approaches and treatments haven't been enough to keep me from having serious problems that are related to the issues that I'm seeking treatment for to begin with. All these things are a shit ton of issues to deal with. The social ineptitude, the compulsive clinginess, the rejection and ostracism from mainstream society, the painful biochemical imbalances, and the nauseating trial and error of medication are all heavy layers of pain that have sat on a vulnerable psyche that lives in agony by not being able to hold their weight, but having to do so anyway. That's too much. And it has been way too fucking much for way too fucking long. So I'm done. I'm sick of living this sad and sorry life I'm stuck in. So I want to be euthanized. And I know that it would take a toll on my family if that were to happen. They'd fall into torment and despair, and they would struggle to come to terms with the fact that I've been gone for good, that I'd be gone for good. And they would go through anger, sadness, and other painful emotions as they struggle to process my death. They would be angry that I left them, and they would be sad that all the good things that could have happened in my life never did. So yes, I acknowledge that it would have a negative impact on some people if I were to be euthanized. But what about me? And what about my dignity? This mental illness has caused me to experience more pain and suffering than I can cope with, and it's been that way for years. I've been very disenfranchised by many people, as it is because of my mental illness and the behavioral issues that surge from it for years. So why should any of these people have a say on whether or not I should live? Should I remain alive because other people think I should, or because other people want me to, despite the suffering I endure because of my mental illness? These people don't necessarily understand the suffering I'm going through, and they're not the ones having to deal with what I have to deal with, living a life of torment that I do not want to live because other people want me to, and because they only want to focus on the good in my life and diminish the bad that has made it so unbearable. Does not sound like a very good reasonable game to me. It does not sound very considerate of me or my dignity. And it is old-fashioned thinker. It is old-fashioned thinking altogether, like the times when a person had a career path or a spouse chosen for them by their parents or something of higher authority. This is the 21st century now, an age of self-determination. So if I'm able to be alive, it should be because I want to, and not because I feel good and comfortable in doing so. Unquote. Most clinicians, now this is the author talking, most clinicians would draw the conclusion that Mary, in this particular instance, is lacking in clarity of thought because she is expressing death wishes. However, it is an obvious fact that the person who is truly incapable of thinking clearly cannot put two and two together. they wouldn't be able to make sense of complex situations or to explain them in a way that Mary does here. She does this with profound clarity of thought and clarity of understanding of her situation, her role in it, the roles of others, and she demonstrates a clear understanding of what she would need to do to recover and the roadblocks she's endured for this recovery to take place. She also has a clear understanding of the implications of her actions on other people. This instance of clarity of thought in the midst of profound psychological distress gives way to often an overlooking fact in the treatment of the mental illness. I'll repeat that. This instance of clarity of thought in the midst of profound psychological distress gives way to an often overlooked fact in the treatment of mental illness. Not everyone with mental illness who expresses death wishes is lacking in clarity of thought. I'll repeat that. Not everyone with mental illness who expresses death wishes is lacking in clarity of thought. To assume that Mary is lacking in clarity of thought for expressing death wishes in her circumstances that she is in, and to deny her a euthanasia procedure on those grounds denotes an inadequate understanding and poor insight into the issues at play in people with mental illness who express death wishes in general, often ignoring the fact that intense pain rather than an inability to think clearly is the driving force behind many instances where the mentally ill express death wishes. Furthermore, because the number one priority of many anti-euthanasia clinicians and world governments is to preserve the lives of the mentally ill who wish to be euthanized, even if it is against their will. It is fair to say that their use of the lack of clarity of thought argument to discourage the death wishes that someone with mental illness expresses, an instance where emotional pain is the cause of said wishes, is a gaslighting strategy to coax them and sometimes coerce them into living, especially when one considers the zealous nature of their life preservationist agenda, which deems life the only valid choice for death wishing mentally ill individuals that they oppress. This in turn involves a variety of ethical issues as we listed below. So, little testimonial from somebody struggling, and clearly they have a clarity of their thinking and rational decision making on what they want to do with their life, and that they get to make the call on when enough is enough. And they even recognize that they will cause pain to the other family members, but that's just life. This is the harsh reality of the world we live in, is even exiting life, you're not going to not hurt somebody. There's going to be risks and dangers even getting out of life. But one of the major problems to me is that life has existed in the first place. If this Mary lady was not born, none of this would have ever happened. And that would have been a good thing. But instead, we see Mary struggling. She's alive. We want her to succeed. I get it. But if she's clearly not, and she's telling us that, hey, this is how I feel, I'm at this point, that has to just be respected. That it just has to be something that we give an option to, if even a very last step, after she's tried other methods. Interesting testimony. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I really feel for this person. And the fact is, people who are different are treated like utter garbage by society. And I think that's why people with like autism or any kind of other developmental delays, they're treated like shit. Nobody wants to be around them. Everybody pushes them away. And I think in large part that causes the mental illnesses. And it's so crazy that we live in a society where, if you have a poor genetics, so to speak, you're treated like you don't matter. But the system says that you do matter, but they don't really treat you like you matter either, because they are not willing to give you the right to die. Okay.
I mean, what can I say? I mean, my heart, first of all, goes out to this person. I mean, the number of different challenges that they have stacked on top of them is, I mean, that's a huge burden. And the fact that, they basically can't get anybody to listen to them or respect the clarity of their thought, which clearly they have pretty profound clarity of thought, honestly. It kind of reminds me of like, in the medical just in terms of physical illnesses, like if you've been a smoker at any point in their life, they always attribute it to any illness that you might have to that. Even if you quit for a long period of time, somehow everything else that's going on can't possibly be anything else's fault. It all goes back to the smoking. And it's kind of similar to this in that, like, if anything, smelling of a death wish is involved in a person's narrative of what's going on in their head, then immediately denied all treatment, or not all treatment, but forced to exactly the opposite, forced to undergo whatever kind of crazy treatment plans these people come up with, for as long as possible. And I just, I can't imagine for some of these clinicians, it's a comfortable situation to be in, because they have to know. I mean, not everybody is forcing patients into this position believes this. By law and by all kinds of other social pressures and stuff, people are forced to practice mental health medicine this way, but it cannot possibly be. It's an insult to everybody's intelligence at the end of the day, because clearly, this person is not a minority. There's many people out there that can accurately, with great clarity, demonstrate their desire to not keep doing this. And that position that we place clinicians in to always basically have to say no. You have to keep running the treadmill. You have to keep pushing the Sisyphusian boulder up the goddamn hill, because there's somehow no other option, even when there is. I'm sure forces a lot of clinicians to not be able to do their job anymore. I mean, seriously, I pushes them themselves to become suicidal. I have absolutely no doubt. And it forces this person to have to take other methods. This person's problems aren't going to go away. You know what I mean? And she's just going to get older, and it's going to get more intense, and who knows what else. And so, I mean, the real heartbreaking thing is like just contemplating what else this person is going to be driven to. If they can't get anything, legally, maybe they don't have good right to die buddies who can, help them find some sort of humane DIY method or something. Well, it's going to be, a series of socks thrown together to, hang herself with, or taking a bunch of shit that might make her sick and might not kill her at all. Or who knows what this person is going to go through, just because we don't have a functional civilization that recognizes that clearly she has command of her mind, and she's the victim of an imposition somebody else forced her into. And yeah, it's devastating.
Excellent. Yeah, I totally agree. It's sad, really, especially the social effects of growing up and being bullied. You know what I mean? If you have any sort of illness at all, I mean, you're just target number one for being picked on, messed with, or dating, or, like she mentioned, dating someone is a struggle. The whole just normal, if you're normal, so to speak, you're, that's a hard road to drive anyway, right there, much less without having severe limitations and disabilities to set you back and come and like try to succeed in that regard too. And it's like, that's just sad to see too, because you're just like, oh man, it's like why you're forcing someone like a car with square wheels to drive a road with circle wheels. That's all. You can't. Everyone's got their own like way of thinking. Even in a classroom, you don't even have to have like severe issues. A classroom, everyone has different levels of learning And they, we don't care. We're still like, oh, this is the agenda though. Here you go. This is a curriculum and good luck keeping up. It's the same thing with life. We're imposing. We're just saying, hey, this is the way we like to do stuff, and whatever, get married, get a job, and have kids, and that's kind of the route. And if you can't do that, you're a problem person. What the hell is that? And I don't know, side tangent there, but it's sick. And I totally agree that staff at hospitals have got to be doing some conversations in the break room where they're just like, oh my gosh, Billy, like, I wish we could just figure out a way to help Billy. I know, but I can't though, because we'll get in trouble legally. I know. Maybe we could do some kind of wink thing. And, maybe there's been some wonderfully like amazing people, even though it's illegal, but we know this has probably happened. They were like able to help them gracefully exit by whatever it is they needed to. But that's the point. There's nothing wrong with that. They helped the person. It was a beautiful moment. That's what we disagree on. Is to us, that was a beautiful moment. And to society, that was murder. And first you have to kind of argue, like, get your point across how that was a negative thing. It was a bad thing. Sorry, I'm just ranting, but yeah, makes sense at all.
Makes perfect sense. I also wanted to add that, societal rejection is a trauma. And as a species, we are very picky on who we choose to be around. It's like the alphas, so to speak, they get to eat first. And people with any kind of differences will be outcasts. And it's a horrible fucking trait that the human species tends to have. And if you're going to be constantly rejected throughout your entire life, of course you're going to be depressed. Of course you're going to have trauma. Of course you're going to want to kill yourself. And why wouldn't you want to end it? And then, on top of that, you are locked into this medical industrial complex that says you should live, you matter. Well, society is not proving that to the individual that they matter. So it'd be kind of hard for them to believe it.
Yeah.
Totally. Sorry, I don't know anything on.
Oh yeah, I totally agree completely. But the next part I think was what is it, Amanda's turn, right? Ready to go?
I do believe I am. Why is the lack of clarity of thought argument against euthanasia a problem? And these are a series of bullet points. It fails to address one of the most common factors that cause many with mental illness to experience suicidal ideation and leanings toward euthanasia in the first place: pain. Rather than mere inability to think clearly, is at the forefront of their death wish in some instances. The more that those with mental illness in these instances think doesn't always influence their death wishes, as do their coping pain tolerance thresholds being surpassed in a given situation, and sometimes for prolonged periods of time. People with refractory mental illness sometimes become suicidal because they are in pain, not necessarily because they cannot think clearly. It heavily discredits the ability of those with refractory mental illness who wish to be euthanized to make informed decisions. Many of these individuals have already done their part by seeking therapists and psychiatrists, picking up coping skills and medications along the way, and using every resource within their reach to achieve recovery over a very long time span before determining that none of these resources have been helpful to them, achieving a life where their lifelong mental illnesses are manageable and tolerable. Therefore, many of those with refractory mental illness lean towards euthanasia because the treatments they choose to undergo in the past were not helpful, not because they're incapable of making good decisions about how to deal with their mental health problems in the first place. It insults the intelligence of and rationale of those with refractory mental illness who wish to be euthanized, implying that their urge to end their pain through death is always because of faulty thinking rather than a genuine struggle to live through pain-inducing circumstances. It has overall negative connotations on the intelligence of and thinking capacity of the mentally ill who wish to be euthanized, practically deeming them to be stupid, crazy, or insane just because they want to end their lives through euthanasia. It dehumanizes the mentally ill who wish to be euthanized and invalidates their plight, neglecting and ignoring the reoccurring pain they endure, which leads them to suicidal thoughts, and deeming it practically meaningless and less important than their own life being preserved, and therefore not a valid enough factor to legitimize euthanasia to end the intolerable suffering caused by their mental illnesses. It also implies that the life preservation agenda of mental health regimes worldwide is more important than the will of the individual in a situation where the pain in their lives is intolerable. Excellent point. It neglects those with mental illness whose conditions are treatment resistant, leaving them out of options to end their intolerable pain and suffering, and thus prolonging their suffering. It overlooks the relatively insightful understanding that many of those with refractory mental illnesses who wish to die may have about their mental illnesses, the myriad of ways in which these illnesses cause their suffering, usually for prolonged periods of time, and the plethora of issues that these illnesses pose on their lives as a whole, to a point where euthanasia is the only reasonable means to end their suffering once and for all. Contrary to popular belief, those with refractory mental illness who wish to be euthanized are not necessarily lacking in awareness of the consequences and implications of their actions, as a baby who is eager to touch a red hot burning coal on a stove without knowing they will get burned. In fact, those with refractory mental illness can be just as capable of understanding the impact of their euthanasia on those around them, in the same way as they understand the impact of their mental illness on their own lives. I mean, pretty much everything there, just golden. Should I read the conclusion, or do we want to, whatever you guys want to do?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Conclusion. The lack of clarity of thought argument that clinicians and world governments use to deny euthanasia of the mentally ill is a tool for oppression that practically forces the mentally ill who wish to be euthanized into continuing to live in pain-inducing circumstances that they have already expressed and have a marked difficulty in coping with, and an inability to cope with further. This oppression from anti-euthanasia clinicians and world governments is always carried out under the misguided cookie-cutter assumptions that people with mental illness and their circumstances are always lacking in clarity of thought simply because they express death wishes. In reality, this isn't always true, as illustrated by Mary's story. Furthermore, the lack of clarity of thought argument fails in that it places too much focus on the thinking ability of those with refractory mental illness who have to be euthanized, and neglects the intolerable pain which leads them to express death wishes in the first place. It also discredits their thinking ability when making decisions about their situation with intolerable suffering, even in circumstances where they have already made the choice to get help in the face of mental and emotional distress. This argument also diminishes the validity of said duress as an understandable reason to justify the use of euthanasia in eliminating a life that is mired in this kind of suffering. This argument places the life of the individual in higher regard than the dignity and comfort, and imposes the idea that this must be the right order of things, and that any thought that deviates from this idea is scientifically and ethically incorrect. The lack of clarity of thought argument, therefore, has a hindering effect on the euthanasia wishing individual that it opposes, because it dehumanizes them by placing their pain extinction at second order of business, thus exasperating their pain in the long run, and by degrading their rationale in times of great distress, that is, in times when they need the most understanding, validation, and compassion. I mean, just so well written. So well written. Yeah.
There's people who are considered sound of mind who I think do crazy stuff all the time. So,
absolutely.
I don't know, have 5 kids when they can't afford them. Or for example, they're never questioned about that. But, it should be, I had a thought there. I'll give you an example of somebody who is unsound of mind. If they have the peaceful pill but are still reaching for the bottle of Clorox bleach to drink, then yes, that shows a marked inability to make a rational decision in that moment. But they should still have the right to die. They should just be steered in the logical direction of when it comes to ending it.
People shouldn't cling to like a cartoon idea of what a mentally ill person is. Like if people's idea of that all mental ill people have this extreme lack of clarity of thought and can't think for themselves, like it's a cartoon version of schizophrenia, basically, is kind of what they're describing. Like total psychotic episode, schizophrenia, like that does have, like, people are in, like, can be in that kind of state, you know, and that can be, I mean, that can happen. It's a real state that the human mind can get in. But even for people who are supposedly otherwise so woke about what mental illness is or how mentally ill people are, the fact that when it comes to the idea of euthanasia, they go back to this cartoon idea of what it is to have a mental illness is, it's just so disappointing, because more often than not, of course, that person is not in that state, because it's a by comparison very rare place for the human mind to go. You know, I'm not saying that those people in those states don't have a right to their own determination, but I'm just saying that you can't rationally believe. I mean, it's a failure of rationality testing to believe that all mentally ill people are just these, you know, vessels of collapsed reason. I mean, it just doesn't. It's not reality at all. But I mean, I think your point you made, Danny, is so important. I mean, there's plenty of failed rationality testing all over the place, even people that aren't diagnosed with a mental illness. I mean, you know, having multiple kids you can't afford is a great example, or, you know, just the relationships people get into, and you know, yeah.
Oh yeah, or even just insane ideologies and beliefs about gods, or, you know,
Angels
and life.
QAnon.
Yeah, I mean, you could just go down the list of the hundreds of things that people believe that they say are rational, but clearly aren't at all. You know, but why can't this just be on the table of conversation, just the same as we talk about, is QAnon rational or not rational? Like, everyone's okay to have that conversation, or whatever. You know, is this next war that we're about to do good or bad, whatever? And it's insane to you know, to some people to go to war, right? Like, it's insanity, but everyone's doing it under rational mind thinking. You know, we're doing this because of these reasons that are rational, or they'll say is rational. But why, it's like, yeah, I'm just saying, throw this, why can't this be on the table too? Just this person screaming in pain in this room for decades saying, I want to die. Why is their words not valuable enough to accept? And, you know, not, and also, just to get off the mental issue, it's like, even in a rational societal right to die, not putting that aside, the methods that we would have for legalization would be a new, complex, nuanced, specific, subjective scenario anyway. Like, we would look at every individual case on a case-by-case basis. And like Danny was saying, you know, if the person's like, this is the pill here, but they grab the bleach instead, we're going to have to like figure out a different way to figure out how to still give them that right. But if someone's just like, I'm depressed, I've been depressed for 50 years, I think I want to do it, but they're acting, you know, normal, then, you know, they probably like are treated in a different way. I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say here, but just the way we do it with a rational right to die would be, for the mentally ill, it would be the same application. It would just be slightly nuanced and treated in a different way, but still with the end goal of giving you the right to your own autonomy. That's the end goal, if that makes sense.
with the QAnon, it reminded me of what happened in last November. Hundreds of people, I think nearly 1,000 people, showed up at Dallas on the anniversary of JFK being assassinated, believing he will come down in spirit and proclaim that Trump won the election. So all these so-called normies better rethink what rationality is. I mean, we elected Donald Trump. We went to Iraq. We did all these crazy fuck things throughout the history of human civilization. It's like the insanity of how people behave is really frustrating to say the least. But the sound of argument is not used when it applies to them. I mean, it's only used to apply to people who don't like life, and yeah, you see what's happening in the world of like, yeah. So I'll slide that point in there.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's a great article. I mean, and it just highlights so much issues in the whole system and the whole idea of how to treat mentally ill people and the whole mental health, behavioral health system needs to get completely reversed around. And I mean, even people going to therapists too, like, should have the right to like talk about how they actually feel about death and dying, instead of feeling like a threat. Like, do we need to worry about you? Are you thinking of hurting yourself or others? And if you say yes to that, there's a whole procedure gone with that. And it's just sad. It's sad. And it's the same thing. I can't imagine. I got to go back to I can't imagine just the history of mental health institutions and how barbaric it was to build these buildings and house them. And there's just a lot of evidence that in history there that they were treated so badly and just treated. I mean, just two people are watching 1,000 people. They can't. Two staff members are watching 1,000 people. Something I read. But anyway, yeah, it's really sad and great article. You guys have anything else to add to that? Or
Yeah, very true. I hope I didn't get too political. I was just trying to just give it, examples of the craziness of this world and what people consider rational and irrational.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, somehow we get to dictate to the mentally handicapped that what's rational and irrational to them, but we got to do our own crazy stuff on our drive home. We got to be worshiping, Joseph Smith or whatever it is, wacky stuff that people are into, and no one's questioning them.
Well, I think it's time we turn the tables on what's considered normal and start asking the questions. Is it sound of mind to believe that life is intrinsically good? Is it sound of mind to deny these people the right to die when they're screwed anyway? We are all screwed. I mean, we are all doomed by evolutionary design anyway. So taking the shortcut to the void doesn't seem wrong at all. And I'm just, people are so hung up on this issue, and yeah, we got to fight against it. We got to use everything that we got. We got to, reason with the preventionist, reason with the medical industrial complex, reason with society. So, oh man, we got a tough hill to climb.
And I mean, there's every age, every time is an important time to have done this, and it's the point that always makes me so crazy. It's like we should be so past this already. It's just so sad that we're 2022 and we're still having to fight for all of this, and we're still so backwards. Everything is still so backwards. Like, civilization is still so far from where it needs to be. And, we're talking about getting political. I mean, now we're living in this time where, someone like me isn't going to be able to necessarily get an abortion if they need one. And that's more life that's here. That's more people potentially who are going to need the right to die, who didn't want to be put here in the first place. And, medically, it's like kind of similar. It's like if you have a person in your practice that really needs the right to die, you have to pretend like that's somehow insanity. And now people are going to be put in exactly the same situation of like, well, you need an abortion. Well, that's insanity. That's crossing a line. But it's just, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's a tangential point, but I kind of don't think so. I mean, it's another level of people being put in a life imposition, on the other end of things. And that only increases the need for the right to die more. If society is going to do this thing where it insists even further, even more than it has in the last 50 years on the creation of life. Yeah. Anyway, you can cut that out if you don't want. Sorry, just rambling.
No, it's a great point. I mean, I you made a good one earlier with the sock thing. So I can't imagine how many DIY methods that the mentally ill folks have had to try to drum up.
Yeah.
In desperation to get out of life in these institutions, or just in general in life, not even the institutions, just life. I'm in a home that I'm in a condition and home in a situation that I can't stand, because your brain doesn't leave you. You could get a broken leg, but in time you could get better. It does get better with a broken leg. Maybe, for the most part, like for a lot of people, like there's hope, whatever. But I don't like that word, but it's like, but for these conditions that are chronic and especially mentally situational, where medication has never worked. They've tried it. And I mean, you could even have a right to die system to where you have to go through all those loopholes. Like, fine, whatever, as long as we can get what we are asking, I'm okay with it. Like, fine, go. You have to go through this. You got to try this medicine. You got to see 3 therapists. I mean, it's not ideal at all. But if that's the case, but in the end, though, we realize, okay, this is the scenario. Like, let's give them what we want. Then great.
Yeah.
That would be nice. But even then, honestly, it's not a right. It's just they're just like treating it like a carrot that you have to chase,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not anti-psychiatry at all. I'm not anti-medication. If these things help people, they've helped me at various points in my life. So I would be an ingrate to say, hey, the answer is to just get rid of all other options, only the right to die. Like, I would never be in favor of that, one or the other. Like, have all those things, great. But especially for the people that have had to go through decades of it already. The fucking pair of pants don't fit. Stop making me squeeze into them,
Yeah, that's a perfect point. It's like, I'm not anti-psychiatry either. I mean, I take medication for anxiety and depression, and but it should be a choice. It shouldn't be an obligation. I mean, the imposers of life, they get all the credit. And going back to the abortion argument, we got 2 radical fundamentalist Catholics in the Supreme Court who are against abortion because they believe in something that can't be proven. So how dare society tell us what is sound of mind?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It just really pisses me off. I'm sorry. It's just I see Looney Tune shit going on everywhere.
I know, me too. And it calls for us to get passionate and angry and furious and frustrated and say, fucking shit, what is going on in this insane world? Like, we're forcing all these people to live and forcing them into existence, and then it drives it. What other reaction should we have other than to be pissed off and furious and marching
during a pandemic?
Yeah.
Like, during a time where, like, people are dying horribly. Like, suffering is not in a good place right now, to put it
No.
mildly. Like, yeah.
It's like, life was imposed upon you. You're going to die anyway. So yeah, don't talk to us about what's considered unsound of mind, if that makes sense. It's like, I think that whole term really needs to be redefined.
Yeah. Or even just in the context of a right to die, it just doesn't even exist. But you're just, whether you're terminal or not, it doesn't matter. What's your situation?
Yeah.
Give us your plea. Let us, what is it that why do you want, everyone's going to be treated differently. The 90-year-old that is terminal and he's got 2 weeks left is going to be treated different than a 12-year-old girl that's just, her boyfriend just dumped her. And, there's nuances in all that, but
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah,
sorry.
no, I mean, well, no, I think I get what you're saying. I mean, we're not talking about having a callous right to die approach where we're just throwing it. We're not suggesting that it be the syrup on your pancakes in the morning. Like, we want it to be accessible, but it's not. We're not saying that it has to be the only option, because it's like you can't take an Advil anymore, because if you're in pain, you just have to do the right to die, and that's it. We're not a death cult. Like, I'm sure people would love to believe that, but that's not what the right to die. That's all right to die advocacy is.
Yeah, the both can be happening at the same time. Treatments towards getting better, and when they don't get better, solutions to that. I mean, it's like me with medication with depression. I've tried it since I was 16, and no medication has ever worked for me ever. Just like our article we read, someone is treatment resistant. I forget the phrase. I think it's drug resistant to, anyway, there's a certain percentage of people, it's 20% or something, to people that they just don't respond to like SSRI, depression medication or whatever. And I've tried all kinds, and I've never felt one bit different, not 1% different ever. And but other friends, they can take a small dose of whatever and they're just like, oh my gosh, this is great. So yeah, we're not advocating for it to be sold next to the bubble gum at 7-Eleven. I mean, that wouldn't be rational or sound of mind. But they're definitely not doing it either by forcing people to do tragic shit.
Yeah, very true. It's because of, as a consequence of not having the right to die, there's going to be more hangings, more shootings, more overdosing on pills. I mean, it's horrible.
Yes, it is. I mean, this topic is so important. I hope we just emphasized a lot of these points that maybe a whole lot of people don't even think about or never even have thought about. We just think treat them and keep them safe and keep them drugged up and do the best you can to keep them alive because mom's coming on Saturday to visit, so let's keep them around for that. And meanwhile the person's living a horrendous life, and we're keeping them around for just the weekly visits, or we got to be serious in these conversations about what life it really means and what suffering really means. And they're asking for it. I mean, so if you ask for it, what is so bad about considering it like help? We're just asking to help people. That's all our mission is here. Is how can we help people have a more quality of life, not a quantity of life, as the phrase goes. But yeah, it's a great article, and I hope you guys got something out of it. Do you guys have anything else to share before we head out?
I just want to say thank you to this author for creating this wonderful blog, and we will definitely share it in the link below. And I hope people get something out of it. And
it's euthanasia mentally .wixsite.com. I'm not sure. I don't think we may not have said that at the beginning. But I think it's some really important work that this person has done, putting these thoughts together and these blog posts together. And so I really want to thank them for that. And yeah, it was a pleasure going. We kind of, I think, all read this a couple of months ago, and it's a pleasure today to revisit it. And yeah, wonderful work.
Yeah. Thank you so much for writing that. So it opened my eyes, honestly, to a couple points where I was like, okay, wow, great. But thanks for joining us, and look out for more. We have guest or two lined up, and episode or two of just us talking trash. Even if you like those, I hope you do. We also have a surprise video of me doing some things out on the street, but I'll keep it at that, and it'll be fun. We'll see. It'll be fun. Danny's also working on a letter that's just amazing. I read it last night. It's a killer thing, but should I not tease that, or do you care?
It's actually going to be way.
Yes, Danny has a letter he's working on. It should be done very shortly. Yeah, and I'm still grinding away at the website. I'll be up soon. Just sorry, guys. I got sucked into the nerdism of WordPress. I didn't know I did, but I did. It was a nightmare. So it'll be up soon, and I think that's all the news for now. But look forward to a future podcast coming shortly for sure. We have a couple things lined up. Does that sound good to everybody?
Sounds great.
Sounds good to me.
Great. Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it. Find us on YouTube, Facebook, The Right to No Longer Exist. All your podcasts, wherever you find your podcast, it should be there. And if not, keep looking. But thanks so much. Appreciate it, guys. And thanks again to the author that wrote this topic that needs to be spread widely. So take care. Thanks again. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.
You have been listening to the Right to No Longer Exist, a Right to Die podcast. We hope that you have enjoyed your time and found the information valuable. Please visit us at therighttonolongerexist.com to learn more about our organization and mission statement. You can also follow us on all of the main social media platforms at The Right to No Longer Exist. There you will find links to our individual channels as well. If you would like to contact us directly, please email info@therighttonolongerexist.com. Thank you for your time, and let's remember that during the time that it took to listen to this podcast, dozens, if not hundreds of people endured a horrific death by suicide. Let's fight together for a world where this doesn't happen anymore. See you next time on the Right to No Longer Exist podcast.